It was 1 year ago tomorrow that I started doing this, and through 147 regular episodes and, half a dozen weekend specials, I have never, to the best of my recollection, talked about abortion. And that's no accident, because there is no topic in the entire universe of human discourse that I enjoy discussing less than that one. It always winds up being a pointless, self-defeating enterprise, because if you make any attempt to stake out a pragmatic position that exists anywhere in the wide expanse between the two polar extremes, you just wind up with some crazy person screaming abuse and epithets at you. But I'm going to make an exception tonight, because I think this new Texas law, and more specifically the Supreme Court decision that followed it, and even more specifically the unhinged mass hysterical overreactions that we've heard from leftist Democrats and fake news performance artists, deserves to be remarked on. And it's going to lead, rather elegantly, I might add, into the broader topic I'm going to get into in the main segment, which is the complete lack of any limiting principles in what passes for leftist Democrat thought here in the third decade of the 21st century. It's impossible to have a useful or instructive dialogue about abortion, and the main reason for that, in my view, is the congenital inability of people on both sides to separate the moral issue from the legal issue. It's the same difficulty that arises in discussions of capital punishment. That is, people just cannot seem to understand that their personal feelings on the subject have nothing whatever to do with the legality or the constitutionality of any legislative act that seeks to promote or to limit the thing, or any court decision that arises out of it. So with abortion, and specifically with the Roe v. Wade decision, if you're in the pro-abortion crowd, your emotional predilections cause you to think that Roe v. Wade is the gold standard of well-reasoned Supreme Court decisions. You venerate Roe v. Wade as if it's holy writ, secular scripture, a cornerstone of our civil society, while if you're in the anti-abortion crowd, your emotional predilections cause you to think that Roe v. Wade is an evil, demonic act perpetrated by a bunch of black-robed, tyrannical baby murderers. But what we never ever hear is any discussion of the actual legal and constitutional merits of that decision itself. Even our idiot president doesn't seem to understand how any of this stuff works, because he stood up there yesterday and actually said, with a straight face and apparent total sincerity, that this is an assault on the constitutional rights of women that were created by the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. Hold up! Pump the brakes there, Grandpa! Who the hell writes this guy's speeches anyway? Some 20-year-old purple-haired gender studies major? So courts can create constitutional rights now? Because here I've been operating my whole life in the apparently mistaken belief that only the Constitution can do that. And look, if there's anything we know about the Democrats, it's that they much prefer judicial activism and bench legislation to any sort of sound legal reasoning, but it's still rather shocking when they admit it out loud like that. The fact of the matter, and again, this has nothing to do with whether you think abortion should be legal, is that Roe v. Wade is possibly the most poorly reasoned decision ever handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court. It is possibly the perfect exemplar for the entire concept of judicial activism and bench legislation. The 5 liberal justices on the 1973 court simply decided that they wanted a nationwide legal protection for abortion rights. So they started at the end point and reverse engineered a logically tortured, legally incoherent rationale for why it should be so. There simply is no reading of the Constitution or the Bill of Rights that permits an interpretation that says, yes, terminating the life of an unborn child is among the elemental civil rights, the sanctity of which this document is intended to guarantee. In fact, if legally indefensible judicial activism is a baseball game, Roe v. Wade is the bastard love child of Babe Ruth and Sandy Koufax. All right, maybe bastard love child wasn't the best allegory to use in that particular case, but I digress. Stop laughing and hit the music, Jim Eagle. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the only legal means of terminating a presidency is by killing the father in single combat before he has the chance to bed his wife on their wedding night, Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Happy Friday. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And in all of the caterwauling, all of the wailing and gnashing of teeth we've heard about the Texas abortion law and the Supreme Court decision here in the past 48 hours or so, there is one question that never gets asked, much less answered. And that is, what is the limiting principle here? What limits on legal abortion are you actually willing to accept? Because on the right, on the pro-life side, they don't have this problem. They think abortion should be illegal, period, full stop. But they also, crucially, take the constitutionally coherent view that they don't want the Congress or the Supreme Court to solve the issue for them. On the pro-life side, at least, they understand how the 10th Amendment works and why it was written. In fact, I can't ever remember that I've heard a pro-life activist demand a nationwide ban on abortion. They seem to be perfectly accepting of the fact that even though they find the act itself to be a morally abominable act of pure evil, they understand that it's a matter not covered in the Constitution, which places it under the wide but ever-shrinking umbrella of the 10th Amendment, which means the people of the individual states should be left to decide what sort of abortion laws they want to have. And what a concept, right? It's almost like, what's it called? Oh yeah, a federal republic. But over on the pro-abortion side, they steadfastly refuse to articulate any sort of limiting principle. They just want abortions to be more numerous and getting an abortion to be easier and more convenient. You can spend the whole day on celebrity Twitter, America's intellectual short bus, or listening to the crazed bloviating of the fake news performance artists, and you will hear no mention of any limiting principle on legal abortion. And when you refuse to articulate a limiting principle, you are not trafficking in anything that can be fairly described as a coherent political philosophy. You are just a person saying words because you want to get yourself more upvotes. There's only been one elected Democrat in recent memory who tried to wade into the waters of stating a limiting principle on abortion, and it was our old friend Ralph Northam from Virginia, good old Governor Blackface McClansman, who last year when Virginia Democrats were attempting to pass what was effectively a bill that legalized honest-to-God infanticide, made the mistake of attempting to answer a question about what the practical real-world implications of the law would be. And in so doing, he created a really shocking bit of video that quickly gained national infamy, and not without good reason. Well, I think that's a deeply personal decision, so we'll go ahead and let that baby be born, and then the mother and her doctor can have that conversation. And he's saying this all in a tone of voice like he doesn't even realize he is talking about the summary execution of a healthy newborn U.S. citizen. So the law winds up not passing, and everybody on the left was terribly upset that Virginia wouldn't be the first state to legalize the actual freaking murder of small children. But without that video clip that rightly horrified every decent person of conscience who saw it, then who knows, maybe the law does pass. Doctor, I know I carried the baby to full term and just gave birth to a healthy boy or girl 5 minutes ago, but now that it's over, I feel like maybe I'm not ready to be a parent, so can we just go ahead and kill it? And that is exactly why every pro-abortion leftist Democrat, except Ralph Northam, assiduously avoids any discussion of limiting factors on legal abortion, because they don't want to have those discussions. They don't want to be pinned down on the real-world implications of the policies they seek to advance. So if you try to pin them down, they just go straight to the standard canards and the ad hominem attacks. If you ask the question, what limits on legal abortion are you willing to accept? They will quickly fire back that you're just a horrible misogynist who is trying to limit women's access to something called reproductive health care. You're the American Taliban! You wish The Handmaid's Tale was a documentary! You bastard! You brute! The White House press secretary, Lady Ginger McFirebush of Alabaster Farms, she knows how to play that game with the best of them, because yesterday there was a reporter, and I don't know who this guy was or what outlet he works for, but he's clearly not a regular in the White House press corps, because he asked an actual probative question that had some journalistic merit. He asked Lady Ginger, quite reasonably, President Biden claims to be a devout Catholic, so why does he support legal abortion when it's contrary to the doctrines of the Catholic Church? Now, Lady Ginger was obviously flummoxed by the nature of this highly offensive query, since we're not supposed to talk about the abject hypocrisy of Democrats who claim to be faithful Catholics while pissing all over the strictures of their own religion. So she takes a moment to gather herself, and then she tries to swat down the question like it's some annoying insect. Well, the president believes it's a woman's right. He believes it's a woman's choice between her and her doctor, yada, yada, yada. And this rude, disrespectful reporter then has the gall to ask the screamingly obvious follow-up question. Well, if he's looking out for the rights of the woman, then who is standing up for the rights of the unborn baby? And at this point, Lady Ginger had had just about enough of this guy, because then she goes straight to the standard screed that you hear from every purple-haired land whale internet troll who wants to shut down the discussion as quickly as possible. You've never been pregnant before. You've never had to face these difficult choices, so you can shut your mouth right now, Mr. Man. Who the hell do you think you are, huh? With your penis and your testicles? Talk to the hand, you filthy misogynist. And it's amazing, astonishing really, how little self-awareness these people have sometimes. How little regard they have for the internal incoherence of their worldview. Because these are the same people who have been lecturing us for the past couple years now about how men really can get pregnant, and about how we should no longer use terms like pregnant woman and new mother, because now we have to call them birthing people. Because having babies is something everybody can do, don't you know? And only a horrible, bigoted, transphobic monster would use outdated, gendered terms to describe people who give birth to babies. When you see a video of some dude jamming his disgusting hairy man nipple into the mouth of a newborn baby and complaining that, oh, I'm not producing milk yet, you're not supposed to recoil in horror at the fact that this clearly mentally ill man is doing this awful thing to this innocent child. You're supposed to applaud this trans woman for bravely attempting to suckle her baby, and you're required to celebrate it as a step forward into a more tolerant and enlightened society. But it's not just abortion and the transgender stuff where our maniacal leftist friends apply the no limiting factor rule, for you will notice they play exactly the same game with voting rights. Last year, we were told that we had to trash all of our election integrity laws, that we had to shotgun blast unsolicited mail ballots out to every voter, living and dead, who ever appeared on a voter roll in the last 200 years, that we had to have election month instead of election day, that we cannot rest until we've made voting in a presidential election as easy and convenient as ordering a cheeseburger or buying a lottery ticket. But don't worry, they said. These are just temporary measures, and we have to do it because COVID. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Empress Nancy, first of her name, even went so far as to say, because if overblown hyperbole were the Olympics, she would be Jesse Owens, that people shouldn't be forced to choose between exercising their right to vote and staying alive. But what's happened since then? What's been the reaction of Empress Nancy and her band of merry men to any attempt at rolling back these provisions that they themselves assured everyone were just going to be temporary, and which we had to do because of the peculiar exigencies of the year 2020? You can't do that, they said. You're waging an assault on the right to vote. You're a racist. And you're not wearing your mandatory religious obedience muzzle, so you're a murderer too. This stuff is all the more hilarious when it comes out of the lie hole in the face of someone like Empress Nancy, since she is such a big fan of hosting $25,000 a plate fundraisers in Napa Valley, where the attendees are 100% white as the pure-driven snow, and the only people wearing religious obedience muzzles are the brown-skinned servants who are bringing their food. And speaking of that, you know who else wins the No Self-Awareness Award this week? The purple-haired land whales who were so indignant, so morally outraged by this assault on reproductive health care being waged by the people of Texas through their democratically elected representatives, that they took to the streets en masse, angrily waving signs with slogans like, "My body, my choice," while dutifully wearing their religious obedience muscles. You really cannot make this stuff up sometimes, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to make sure I'm absolutely clear on how the logic works here. Your right to bodily autonomy and reproductive health care is so important, so sacrosanct, so all-consuming, so morally inviolable that it extends all the way to being able to get an abortion right up until the moment of the birth of your full-term child, and possibly even farther than that, according to Ralph Northam. But you have no right to decline being injected with an experimental drug that you don't want or need, and no right to refuse wearing a mandatory religious face covering. I guess maybe I'm just a hopeless misogynist bastard, because from where I'm sitting, that logic is just about as tortured and as nonsensical as the reasoning behind the Roe v. Wade decision of 1973. I think if it had happened at a different time than right now, this Texas law and the Supreme Court decision, don't get me wrong, there still would have been absurdly overwrought reactions to it from all of the same people. But it probably would not have taken on the same cataclysmic proportions as it has in the actual event. Because Joe Biden's presidency is self-destructing in real time, more quickly than any presidency has ever collapsed before, and there is wholesale desperation on the left to pivot to something else, anything else, so the general public will forget about the Afghanistan disaster and move on from it. They tried to pivot to the hurricane, but not enough people died, so that didn't work. Then they tried to pivot to climate change, and that didn't work. Possibly because Joe Biden's advisors suddenly remembered that he was the same guy who assured the American people last year during the campaign that there wouldn't be any more floods and hurricanes and wildfires if we just got rid of the bad orange climate denier. And climate change? That might be the mother of all dubious arguments with no limiting principle. There are no data we can show you for why it's a correct argument. But anyway, still, you have to give up your entire way of life, most of your possessions, pay drastically higher taxes, drive a ridiculous overpriced battery-powered toy car, acquiesce to massively unprecedented expansions of central government power and the wholesale degradation of your rights and liberties, support the blighting of huge swaths of the natural landscape with bird-slicing, bat-chomping eco-crucifixes, so that the global mean temperature might hypothetically be 0.3 degree cooler 100 years after you die. Because who wouldn't want to sign up for that deal, right? There is never any sort of of limiting principle articulated on any of these things. And when we act suspicious, they call us conspiracy theorists. Just like they used to call us conspiracy theorists when we predicted that when the end of liberty came, it would happen under the guise of public health. And what have we witnessed just since the start of last year? Did you have any idea the Centers for Disease Control possessed the authority to nationalize every rental property in the entire country? You probably didn't. I sure as hell didn't. But it already happened. And even though the Supreme Court has already struck it down twice, the Joe Biden administration told the Supreme Court to get fucked and kept on doing it anyway. We've talked a few times before about the parable of the self-licking ice cream cone, and this CDC eviction moratorium might be the most fitting example of it that's ever been seen. First, declare that all the renters in the country no longer have to pay their rent, and then print up trillions of dollars of fake money and send it to the tenants so they can not pay their rent with it, and then print more trillions of dollars of fake money and send it to the non-rent paying tenants and call it enhanced unemployment benefits, just to make extra sure that nobody has any reason to even contemplate rejoining the workforce. And then, the cherry on top of the sundae happened 3 weeks ago. It went nearly unnoticed by everyone, but amazingly, the Department of Housing and Urban Development announced the creation of a program to send financial aid to property owners who've been negatively impacted by the eviction moratorium. So for those fans keeping score at home, that is 3 separate federal government interventions which sought to solve a problem that never existed except as a result of bad government policy and which could have been ameliorated completely just by rescinding the original bad policy. That is where we are now. And this stuff is reaching such impossible heights of absurdity that I think we're going to have to invent a new metaphor, because I don't think self-licking ice cream cone goes far enough anymore. Our central government is being run by people who are so mind-numbingly, inconceivably stupid, so astoundingly unqualified to hold the offices they occupy and to wield the awesome power they possess, that when they're not busy perpetrating the most disastrous foreign policy debacle by any world power in the last 200 years, they are confidently assuring you, the American citizen, that the only way to solve the problems they created by their own bumbling incompetence is by massively expanding the government, granting it even more inscrutable power, giving it even more of your money, and surrendering whatever of your rights and liberties it hasn't already taken away. But don't worry, because we'll make sure you can get a free 9th month abortion whenever you need one, because that's the only thing that really matters. Thanks for watching. Have a pleasant weekend. See you Monday. Get off my lawn.